Everyone, and welcome back to Haunted Cerebral Astrology. We're going to do another cool video this week on some of the transits that are going on. So thanks for tuning in. As you can see, I kind of upgraded some of my systems. So now I'm in HD and I have a new microphone. So hopefully these things run smoothly. This is my first time trying it. We're already in Mercury shadow. So hopefully these investments were worth it. So let's see how it goes. Also, I want to thank everyone for your continued support of me and my work. If you want to continue, if you'd like to support my work, please hit the like button, leave a comment, subscribe. You can donate as well if you're inclined. And if you're looking to do a consultation with me, all the connection information is down in the description box below. So let's just jump right into the astrology of this week. As you can see, it's kind of a busy week. A lot of lunar transits going on, as sometimes there normally is. But kind of the big ones that are going on are, I think, like with Venus moving in, Moon moving into Virgo, there's going to be some kind of contradictions to the story as it has been going so far. I think also with Venus conjoining the nodes tomorrow, that's kind of intense. Also, you may have noticed that the nodes that I'm using are a bit different than normal. That's because I'm using the mean nodes, not the true nodes. So it's more of an ancient astrological calculation than a modern one. Yeah, so those are kind of intense. And then also, I think that, yeah, so the sun moves into Gemini this week as well. And this kind of really this is where kind of eclipse season starts in earnest. And then we also have that Venus trine to Saturn, just making things a bit more intense in relationships. And then kind of the end of the week is more like preparing kind of for next week with eclipse season starting, and where we're at in our relationships too is kind of important with Moon going into Libra. And then the week ends with Saturn station retrograde. So let's kind of get more into what that all means. And I'll try and break it down one by one. If I miss anything in the kind of overall scheme here, I'll try and get into it as I go through each of the transits. And if you're just looking for a specific day in the transits too, just go down into the description box and I time code everything. So if you just want to check out what's going on today, you can check out then, or you can flip back and forth. So the idea is that you can just check in through the week as well. So hold on, I'm going to just share my astrology software. And if you're wondering, some people ask me what software I'm using Astro Gold. It's like the Mac version of SolarFire. So that's the software I'm using if you're wondering. Okay, so let's just get into it. So the first thing that I wanted to kind of address was something that happened actually last night and would have been flavoring the morning, which is a couple transits. The first one is this Moon trine to Neptune. So the Moon moved into this trine with Neptune late last night. I think it would have been like middle of the night. Yeah, so it was around like midnight when it went exact a little bit after it, but yeah, around midnight, 1 o'clock would have gone exact. So some people may have overslept this morning, or they may have been a time in your dreams when you've been reflecting on some of the circumstances of dreams, of your romance situation right now, or maybe fantasies regarding the world at large, your worldview, maybe where you stand in the world right now in terms of different matters pertaining to the Pisces and Cancer area of your life. So dreams may be more vivid in general, though as it's a trine, those dreams may be supportive to us emotionally and sentimentally, and helping us to maybe emotionally come to terms with some of the delusions we have and some of the fantasies we're having and some of the conditions of nostalgia we may be indulging with and that we may be grappling with, since, Mars is still in Cancer sign. So there's a bit more of a struggling with some of those emotions in general. So we may be a bit lost in our heads, stuck in the past somewhat, thinking on the what ifs way more than the what is. So some of us maybe not wanting to really live on life on life's terms, wanting something that could have been rather than the way it is. So this may be just like shedding some light onto a situation that you may not be totally clear about in general, though it's a bit too vague to know what to do. So it's kind of like, what your feelings of the truth of the situation are and not knowing whether it's best to act or not. So if you can't really trust what you're feeling, maybe it's better to sit with those feelings and to allow them to ground themselves with you before doing anything. It also kind of just highlights the recent ingress of Jupiter into Pisces, since Moon is still trining Jupiter by sign. So there's a sign-based trine. So really starting to see the disparity between one circumstances and another's. It may be like, with Jupiter moving into Pisces last week, I think it became really clear that like maybe some things are really expanding and becoming more possibilities for some, while clearly, globally on the certain circumstances, there's a lot of disparity and there's a lot of still suffering. But at the same time, I think that this week is going to show us more about what Jupiter in Pisces means, and that it's not just like, gumdrops and rainbows, that there's still a reality to it. And also that Jupiter is not in Pisces fully. It's just a preview of 2022. So sure, for some of us, this may be a very expansive and abundant time, while for others, it really is not. And so we're kind of getting very emotional about that disparity on some level. Some of us are, at least. And, starting to really consider one's position in that overall scheme. Okay, so let's move forward to that next transit, which is going to be, the moon's going to move into a sextile with the sun around 8 in the morning. So this will be kind of like what a lot of people will wake up to, or what their like morning routine will be flavored by. The moon is kind of gaining light at this time too. So it's starting to emphasize this desire to do something, to take some action on some of the feelings maybe we had from the night before or from over the weekend. What are we going to do in order to deal with some of these things? Now we're starting to know that there is a lot to do during this lunar cycle, and coming to see that this little break of the new moon is really over. It's like now action is necessary in order to get forward. There is some sort of challenge though, because the two luminaries are in more kind of chilled, relaxed signs. They're in these, the sun is in the moon's exaltation. So the circumstance is still this very kind of like slow moving, wanted to be more in touch maybe with nature, with the body, with sensual pleasures. And at the same time, the circumstance is getting ready to shift into something that's more about, showing our regal presence in the world and being a more of a performer than a receiver on some levels. So the moon is still in Cancer as well. So there's this kind of like still kind of being in touch with the emotions from the night before, and how the circumstances and the setting, the kind of story that's going forward in our morning routine, maybe wanting to be more calm while actually we have to be more active. It's very much like a case of the Mondays kind of vibe. So the body may be acting sluggish while the mind knows there's a lot to work to do. Mercury is still domicile here. So our thinking is still very like geared towards, okay, we got a lot to do. There's a lot of actions to do. There's a lot of communications, a lot of exchanges, but that there's on some other level, there's a harmony in our understanding of the situation and knowing what to do. So even though maybe there's a struggle to get things moving, we know what that sense of direction is, and we know what the plan is. So there's no kind of question about what to do next. But yeah, so there's kind of like a lot of emotional residuals going on, wanting to nurture ourselves, but not really having the time or space to do so. So having a bit of faith that we can deal with the problems now, and that there will be more space moving on. Jupiter is in Pisces as well. So there is a lot of space, but we still have to do things, right, in order to access that. We can't just live in the sea all the time. We have to also, eat food. We also have to take care of our responsibilities. And this week is going to kind of emphasize how responsibilities and, the space we want, this kind of openness that we're attaching, that we want to be more embracing of, they're coming into kind of conflict with one another. Okay, so let's just move forward to the next kind of transit I was going to talk about, which is that like basically as soon as the moon does make that sextile to the sun, it then like moves into an exact opposition with Pluto in Capricorn. So I'm not going to go too into this, but basically, fear sets in on some level. Things are not really as they seem. Some sort of darkness draws us away from our routines and our plans. Maybe something that shows us like there's more cracks in the plan than we thought originally. Maybe we're changing over some sort of power narrative on some level. And then really like right after that, then the sun will trine with Pluto as well. So we have this kind of sextile to the two luminaries, the trine between Pluto and the sun. And so the luminaries are both interacting with Pluto in different ways. And so with the sun having this trine with Pluto right after, it's kind of putting our attention onto that problem on some level, then taking the necessary action using our supportive voice to call this growing intensity and fear on some level. So making a change to reduce the possibilities of things overwhelming us, like making changes before they overwhelm us, right? And kind of what's great on some level is that even though maybe these changes kind of distract us from our plan on some level, kind of put things in a different perspective and make like kind of change over the power on some terms, we do have the options available right now to make changes. And maybe it doesn't follow our ideal, but it does bring some level of peace of mind. All right, so that's kind of basically what flavors most of the day into the afternoon. And then kind of like around 3, which is, around when I'm making this recording, the moon then moves into Leo thereafter. And this will just kind of flavor the rest of the day. Energy kind of shifts now to transcend the uncertainty on some levels, getting out of that emotional intoxication of that water signs, and also this kind of the exaggeration of Jupiter and Pisces, into more something that's more about the spirit of our endeavors. So the moon is going to bring us into circumstances that are on our course, right? They're part of our plan to see our ideals manifest. And this is kind of basically just preparing us for what's next, putting things into order so that they not only feel good, but they look good too. Because I think that Leo is also about appearances as well, since the sun is going to show us things that we're only going to be able to see through the light of the day. And so with Leo being the domicile of the sun, there's something about seeing and the way things look that we need them to be seen in order to understand them. All right, so that basically is all of Monday. So I might as well just move into Tuesday, because the moon doesn't make really any aspects until Tuesday, when it moves into that sextile with Venus. So that happens basically midday on Tuesday. So like from midday on Monday till midday on Tuesday, not much goes on with the moon. Not much really changes in terms of what has already been established between Monday and Tuesday. But now the moon's moving into this sextile with Venus. Like I said, the transits don't really start till midday. So we're kind of carrying over this vibe of this new spirit in Leo. So this is like thinking that the risks on some level, the risks that we're taking, the way that we're putting ourselves out there, some of the new spirit of our actions and such are kind of, we're putting ourselves out there to risk ourselves a little bit. And that perhaps we're feeling like, these risks are worth it. There's no consequences to our actions. Everything is just in good fun, right? But there are risks to be taken. We can have fun with those risks. But it's more about like, are we doing something that we enjoy and that gives us a sense of pride and curiosity as well? There's a lot of passion to be put into our investments as well right now. Maybe some of the risks we're taking have to do with some of the things we're more passionate about, some of our career paths, some of our passion projects and things like that. Maybe we've put a lot of new investments into those things, And this can induce some sort of uncertainty as well, because as you can see, the moon is moving into that square with Uranus, which I'll break down in a bit too. But basically, now that the moon is starting to interact more with the other planets in Leo, we're starting to see like, okay, is our plan going to work, or am I stretching things a bit too far? I think it's important to remember that without taking risks, of course, and investing in our plans and in our projects, then those plans are kind of going to go nowhere. We're only going to get results if we start to invest things. Or at least they will not grow and be nurtured without investment and risk on some level. So there is some chance to lose something, and we start to kind of realize that there is a chance to lose here. But it's important to remember that we need to be willing to make mistakes, or we're never going to learn anything new. So I would suggest trying to have fun with this. Put your best foot forward and show that you can accomplish your goals, and you can be this accomplished self that you want to be, that you would like to show others that you are as well. So yeah, like I said, moon then pretty much right after moves into that square with Uranus, right? So with the square to Uranus, then there's going to be a bit more disruptions to things. The moon is now in Leo, so it wants to be more regal, wants to be a leader, wants the one to set the plan in order and things like that. But Uranus is kind of disrupting that, showing us the cracks in what we thought was solid, being in Taurus, this like very earthy, very solid rock, ground based, like the mountains, the base of the mountain. You don't want that to be disturbed, because then the whole mountain comes down. And with Uranus there, it's kind of like showing us that the foundations, there's some cracks in it. There's cracks in our plan, showing us how things are not exactly adding up, and that there's risk showing in their uncompromising nature. And we could begin to see that our fortunes are changing, either for good or for ill. So it depends on how the story has been going for you, how the circumstances have been for you. This could be a change in that circumstance, in that fortune for you. So let's just move forward to, so basically then right after, like an hour later, the moon, Venus then will conjoin with the North Node. And I'm not going to go too into this, but, we already kind of established what the North Node's doing in Gemini last week with Mercury conjoining the North Node. But with Venus kind of conjoining the North Node, there's just going to be an increase to these Venus themes in our relationships, in our pleasure seeking, and our recreational activities. We could also see our increase in repulsiveness to our tastes, things that are just a bit too disgusting to us in this time. And all these things are related to our tastes in all matters Gemini. So where do you have Gemini in your chart? Where are you going to see that the relationships forming, and like the communications and the exchanges and these mercurial matters are coming to greater intensity, to a greater speed on some level. They're increasing, since the North Node's nature is to increase. And so there could just be an excess in expressiveness between relationships, between loved ones, between aesthetics and things like that, in our creative endeavors and things like that. So just be aware of that, on how maybe those things might be just kind of intensifying on some level. So then basically the last thing that happens on Tuesday is that the moon will move into that exact opposition with Saturn. Happens between 4 and 5 p.m. in Berlin, Germany. So I'm in the Central European time zone. So usually I try to say this every week, but if you are like, oh, wow, the times are so different for me, that's because you just need to adjust the time zone to your time zone. And maybe, a transit will happen when you're asleep, or it'll happen when you're awake. But basically the significations will be the same. So yeah, the moon moves into that opposition with Saturn later in the afternoon here in Germany. And so we're kind of starting to see the limitations and feel those limitations of our plan. Tensions are kind of building between pulling us towards our plan and where we're at emotionally as well, and starting to kind of feel the fear of some of the seriousness, starting to see that like there's quite a bit of responsibility in some of the risks that we're taking. And we may start to get a dose of some of the hardships that will weigh in upon us if we continue on our course without some sort of principles in our actions, if we're not aware of what our limitations are. This is about like knowing the limits of our plan, knowing when you've put too much at risk, and pulling out before it's gone too far. So it's this kind of just knowing that we cannot just play all night. We can't just party all night without expecting some sort of exhaustion or hangover in the morning, right? This is kind of also knowing one's place in the game and in the plan. That the world does not just revolve around us alone, and that if we're going to play, we have to know our limits as well. So not overstepping our place in the narrative and not turning others into enemies out of resentments or fear on some level. So placing limits on our risks, on our investments, setting a cap on what we're winning means also being able to pull out at that time too. So just because we go into like a card game, for instance, or we go into a risky situation with some intention to be like, okay, I'm gonna, when I double my money, I'm gonna get out of here. But then you double your money, you're like, oh, maybe I'll go a little bit further. This is like that transit that says like, this is the importance of knowing your limits, because if you take it too far, then you may end up losing more than you expect. You may even losing your whole investment to begin with, right? So that basically ends Tuesday. So let's just move on into Wednesday. So the first thing that happens is that, so the moon's just moving through Leo, and then the moon ends up making a sextile with Mercury. Oops. So yeah, makes that sextile with Mercury early in the morning, quite early in the morning. So this may be something that influences our dreams or wakes us up in the middle of the night. Maybe our minds are just really active at this time, and we wake up in the middle of the night on some level. So this way, wake us up and to find some sort of solution to our problems. So, you know, sextile is a more harmonizing and constructive aspect. I often like to think, I mean, the sextile is often considered like a benefic aspect, but I really think it's more about constructive qualities. It's like, it's that first flavor of something being figured out before things become a bigger problem, or before conflicts start to emerge, or starting to see like where maybe some solutions could be applied. So we need to kind of figure out what that first step is. Mercury is also slowing down, right? So it's going to station retrograde next week. So Mercury's really slowing down, and that's whenever a planet slows down, it starts to intensify some of its significations. So Mercury is also in its evening star phase right now. So actually last night it was really cool. I was like, I wanted to see the evening star, and I thought maybe I could see Venus. I didn't know if it was if it was far enough away from the sun. And I went out last night, and then in the end, I actually saw the evening star Mercury. So I would highly encourage anyone who is interested in astronomy or astrology to go out around sunset and to look at the western horizon, because you'll see, you may be able to start seeing Venus there, but you'll definitely see Mercury. Anyway, so Mercury's in the evening star phase, and that just means that Mercury is a bit more receptive and reflective in general. So this may be more encouraging to some of these thinking patterns that are engaging between the moon and Mercury. And this is about getting us more in touch with some of the rapid fire exchanges that Mercury has been making in the last days and last weeks, and kind of starting to kind of pull those back, seeing that we can't just be on this rapid fire exchange all the time. We have to, on some level, start to reflect on what exchanges have been made so far, what the risks involved mean, and how to find some solutions to those risks if they pose any kind of problems. So this is kind of just covering our bases. That's what I mean by it's a constructive kind of support, more harmonizing and helpful aspect. It's also got some kind of curious energy to it. I think that this could make a positive situation for communication, maybe with a crush that you have, or something that you want to have fun with that involves technology or communication or exchanges on some level. There's definitely like a playfulness to the moon right now being in Leo. Mercury is also encouraging that playfulness, maybe even enabling it on some level. So there could be some excitement to our messages. I would say in general, it's really not a time to cause new problems, to cause any kind of new risks or drama. Mercury is in shadow now. So really anything you're exchanging, any sort of exchanges you're making now, any kind of new mercurial matters you're getting involved with, they're going to need to gone back. You're going to have to go back over them again in the coming weeks, right? So there's a lot of pride to nurture with the moon in Leo, but it could be that if we are communicating in new ways, if we're playing out some scenario that we've wanted to for a while, this could just be something of us just filling the void on some level. All right, so let's just move forward because the moon then keeps going through Leo, and then it kind of moves into that square with the sun before changing signs. So this is the first quarter moon, and this is usually like a crisis in action on some level. So this is really for us to really like start to see, since the last lunation, you know, since the new moon especially, you know, what is working, what is not, what do we need to push through, and what challenges are presenting themselves, and can we do it? Can we face these challenges? Often the first quarter moon, it comes with a crisis of sorts on some level. And what is happening between our Virgo and Taurus areas of life, or between our Leo and our Taurus areas of life? Is there something that should be more managed and more stable in our lives that is kind of being changed and being forcibly changed, and that is coming into some crisis? And can we deal with those things? And can we deal with them appropriately? So that's kind of what I want to just point out with that. I'm not going to go too into it because I'd like to try and do these videos a little bit quicker if possible. All right. So anyway, so the moon then moves into Virgo at the end of the day, like basically in the middle of the night, just before midnight. And as it moves in, as you can see, like literally as soon as it moved in, it goes from that square to the sun into the opposition with Jupiter. But basically, you know, once the moon moves into Virgo, there's an energy shift, as all lunar transits are going to have. But basically, it's starting to pick things apart, right? So Mercury is a bit more, Virgo is a bit more of a meticulous sign. It's going to pick up more of those practical, meticulous, factual matters, mercurial matters, and mercurial significations. So this is starting to pick things apart, seeing what can be held onto and what needs to be delegated in order to persevere, right? So it's kind of still on some level picking up on that square to the sun. Just because it changed signs doesn't mean it's still holding on to it. Though often when a planet changes signs, it's going to enter a whole new circumstance for itself. Anyway, so this is really, like I said, it's related to the first quarter moon, and this is really just emphasizing our resourcefulness and how we can make circumstances work moving forward. It's carrying us into the night before the opposition to Jupiter as well. And this could just make it more difficult to sleep. Like we may just be kind of going over things, maybe dealing with whatever crisis has come up in general. There may be some overthinking and trying to figure out what the details are while being kind of overwhelmed by the situation as it weighs in on us. Our dreams really are, you know, we're starting to question things. There starts to be this more critical voice that emerges. And it's kind of like, are our dreams really possible, or are we just grasping for straws here? And what part of our hopes and dreams are workable, and how do we come back to reality as well? Like how do we make our hopes and dreams a reality and not just some fiction in our head, not some wishful thinking, right? Anyway, so that ends Wednesday. So let's just go on to Thursday. Right. So basically, like I said, first thing in the morning on Thursday, we're going to get that opposition to Jupiter. So this is kind of, this is really the first, I would say, critical, you know, we may have already been exposing ourselves to the flaws in this whole Jupiter transit into Pisces, but this is where we really start to apply our perspective on it. Maybe we start to really see the cracks and things. So moon's opposing Jupiter around midnight. This is going to really flavor the night. It's going to also influence our dreams on some level. Maybe we have those kinds of dreams, which are like, you know, all all these little gnomes come and attack us and we can't seem to get rid of them kind of thing, because it's usually our unconscious telling us that there's a overwhelming, unsolvable problems kind of emerging. We may also be out that night, so this could be influencing our time out at that evening as well. So it's also the first aspect that the moon has made with Jupiter since the trine in Cancer over the weekend. So this is kind of turning the tables on those possibilities. Like I said, this becomes more of a critical voice. And it's becoming more critical on that openness and the potential of all these planets in domicile that we would have had over the weekend. You know, there might have been the full steam ahead from like Thursday into Sunday, especially Thursday into Saturday. But now, you know, we're starting to turn the tables on that a bit. And this is kind of drawing a line on what we can do versus what we want to do. And this is also like this reality of our situation, overtaking the dreams we have about maybe some of the faith we have in the world. The moon is also moving out of becoming overcome by Jupiter's optimism. As you can see, once a planet moves into this opposition, it's coming out of whatever relationship it had with the planet before, which before Jupiter would have been, you know, in the superior position. And now the moon's going to be moving into that superior position with Jupiter. So really what's happening in Virgo, this critical perspective, is starting to overtake this kind of wishful thinking. So yeah, so where was I? But basically, yeah, so Jupiter has this buoyancy in Pisces that maybe we're starting to see isn't as buoyant as we thought it would be. Like I said, Jupiter is only giving us a flavor of 2022. It's not the full buoyant lifting that Jupiter in Pisces is going to bring next year. Moon is also carrying with it all this reality checks, maybe of the last 48 hours, as it approaches the nodes as well. So it's approaching a square to the nodes, and usually what it said is when the moon squares the nodes, depending on which node it's heading towards, it's going to be going up in latitude or down in latitude, right? So when it goes down in latitude towards the south node, we're starting to enter a more darker, more contemplative period. If you remember, the last time that happened was just after the Scorpio full moon. So kind of imagine that sort of like contemplative and separative vibrations in our mental states, in our emotional states, in our circumstances as well. But at the same time, you know, Jupiter is in Pisces. This is maybe a bit of a reality check on it. It's not, like I said, all gumdrops and rainbows, but there is also a lot of good going on. So, but you know, we also have to learn that there's also a lot of contradictions to those things that are maybe overwhelming us too. And maybe the media has been very overwhelming, and it's kind of contrasting with some of the overcoming stories of hope and faith that may have also been emerging in the last weeks too. Pisces is really like about this vision, as opposed to Sagittarius's way of Jupiter working with Jupiter, I would say, which has a lot more to do with kind of, redeeming ourselves from some of the recklessness, or to having some enthusiasm about the adventure we're on some level. In Pisces, it's more about this vision. It's about this divine discontent and how Jupiter is there to improve the discontent. So even if there are these kinds of things that are issues right now that seem like big problems that are so overwhelming, with Jupiter there, it's also showing us how we can how the spirit of the times are able to overcome these great challenges. So it doesn't mean that there's not going to be issues associated with this. It's not a perfect world, you know, just because Jupiter moves into Pisces doesn't mean the world becomes perfect, right? We have to come to terms with the separation from delusions, right? We have to redeem the narrative of the worldview. And seeing how having faith doesn't just mean that you're crazy, that there's also a spiritual perspective to consider. Now, of course, reality is going to win here. The convincing nature of reality usually wins. Like, our senses are just too convincing, right? Reality is very convincing. So it's a time also to act accordingly. And if we want to continue to grow and heal in our lives, we have to act accordingly to reality, which may also just mean, you know, like, for instance, if you want to stay sober, if you want to keep clean on some level, you can't just go to the club. You can't go to the bar. It's like this. It's like the saying they have where it's like, if you don't want to have a haircut, don't go to the barber shop, right? So if you're holding on to any reservations about what to do next, there's no way that you're going to stay on course. You have to drop the desire for moving back, for holding on to fear, for holding on to what doesn't work, right? So try to renegotiate your motivations now. Sometimes things we deem are negative are great motivators for doing the positive. This is just a very critical situation in general. Like the world is at a critical stage right now, and where the voice of the people is starting to push and prod at the constitutions of governments, as well at the way the status quo has been going. You know, this all has to do with like this whole 2021 narrative has to do with the square between Uranus and Saturn, which is all about that pushing and prodding of the status quo. So, you know, maybe we start to take a closer look at some of the delusions of the status quo and some of the powers that be, and that are trying to escape. Rather than trying to just escape from the problems, we can start to maybe interact with them a little bit more. For instance, like, why the hell is in the cover of the news, like, you know, space rovers going to Mars when the world is like on fire every year? You know, it might be a time for healthy and constructive criticism, not a time to really pick things apart and be cynical. You know, it's not about separating ourselves from others, but reconnecting ourselves. So there really is the here and now. If we keep thinking that our lives are going to start on the other side of a hill, we're just deluding ourselves. The only place to build serenity and peace of mind is in the here and now. It's not in this world of what ifs. So let yourself try to be embraced by some of the silences. This is why I think, you know, meditation is such a valuable practice, because it allows you to embrace silence on some level. It helps you to be in an ever-present, ever-caring, all-encompassing silence that encompasses the entire universe in the here and now. So the universe will provide, right, if you allow it to, but only if you allow it to. It's once you allow it that your life begins to open up as well too, you know. So this is really, like, I think it's often said to me that, you know, life, where we are in our lives right now, it's not some dress rehearsal, right? Like, life is right now, and faith is really not a feeling so much as it's a state of mind, and you can either have it or you don't, and you can either choose to have it or not. You know, sometimes we need to fake it till we make it. And, you know, faith isn't going to twist your arm about it. It's like, either you're going to engage with it or not. It's up to you. It's not a feeling that you can suddenly wait to have. So there you go. That's my little soapbox about it. So let's just move forward, because I've kind of lingered on that transit for a little while, but I think it's important to point out that, like, Jupiter in Pisces doesn't mean the world's just going to suddenly become a perfect place. It's like, no, we still have to do some work here. You know, like, we still live in reality. You still have to wake up and feed yourself. You still have to use the washroom. You still have to pay the bills. You still have to live in the world with other people, right? Anyway. So then the moon moves, so we move forward, and then we get that nice trine from Venus to Saturn. And I'm pretty excited about this one, actually. I feel like this is a really good transit. Our relationships are coming into a very committed place where they start to get more peaceable too. More peacefulness comes into maybe our relationships, maybe our relationship to greater structures, to finding commitments, things that maybe we had fear about before, we started to come in a better commune with. So, you know, think about the last time that this would have happened too. Venus was in a much more difficult place. It was also when Venus went retrograde. This is when, like, the lockdowns happened. This is when, you know, the whole world started to move online. This is when home office started to take over and all that stuff. Just a lot of uncertainty was taking place. And sure, the world is still full of uncertainty. I don't think that's ever going to change. But at least now we have a bit more familiarity with our scenario. And this could be really like a social time, but also a serious time, a time to be more serious in our commitments, in our communications, a time to bond with things that really matter. And this could be very stabilizing, you know, a time to maybe place down some roots in relationships and where we are in the world and the messages we're exchanging. and starting to kind of enjoy and maybe find love in the bonds between the hardships and winter souls. So, what are the, starting to really nurture connections that will help you last for the winter, so to speak. Like if you think of the winter as those kind of periods of dry coldness that we need to have preserved things that will carry us through that. And this could be about that time when we nurture those relationships that will carry us through the more dry and cold periods to come. And it's really just like about it, like I said, it's an exchange of currencies that really matter. And starting to be very sure about who it is that we want in our lives and who it is that we do not really want in our lives any longer. Like what kind of behaviors in this whole Venus narrative up to this point have kind of showed us some of the things we're attracted to, some of the things we're repulsed by. And I think with the support of trine to Saturn, it's kind of like, okay, well, if something didn't work out, there's a reason for that. Or it's like if something didn't work out, but maybe it's about reestablishing that connection. Maybe there's something we missed, and being more comfortable and having a better relationship with the impermanence of relationships and communications and exchanges and things like that. Okay, so that's kind of one of my favorite transits of the week, actually. But let's just move forward to the last thing that takes place on Thursday. So, well, there is that trine to Uranus, basically with the moon, maybe just making a more supportive relationship to some of the cracks that we were feeling in the foundations. Maybe now we're like enacting some solutions to those things, and we're starting to see like, okay, if we kind of bond things in a certain way, then we can hold things together more securely. We can keep things going. But really what I wanted to talk about was the sun then moves into Gemini there. So sun moves into Gemini. Gemini season begins. Happy birthday to all the Geminis, but also eclipse season really starts in earnest. So I would say eclipse season really started since the Taurus new moon, but now that the sun's in Gemini, this is where it really begins in earnest. We're going to start to see really the problems of the season begin. This is not to, send out any problems to and hurt to all the Geminis I know out there. This isn't about you on a personal level. It's just about how the season is going to be pretty chaotic. Eclipse season starts. Gemini season last year was also crazy. So think about that last year. So it's just a very busy time. Mercury is going to go retrograde soon as well. So it's just going to be a very busy time. It's a very active time. There's a lot of exchanges going on. There are going to be changes to the exchanges. Maybe we're going back on words. Maybe we're taking back a purchase of some kind. Maybe we're turning the tables on a conversation. This is also taking the story into more mercurial matters. Maybe some of the things that we've been like playing with or talking about or exchanging on some level the last week, in the last or since the last lunation, especially when Mercury would have moved into Gemini. And there would have been more, and then Venus followed suit as well. So there's just like more of this mercurial matters going on. But now with the sun there, the story really starts to focus in. And now it's time to focus in on our day-to-day to be more about whatever Gemini area of our life it is in. So look at your chart, where's Gemini, and that's going to really show you where all this kind of high-speed exchanges are taking place. So just for instance, what did you buy in the last weeks? What did you say in the last weeks? What did you learn in the last weeks? And what things did you compromise, change, and become more flexible about in the last weeks? So because these are all the things that are going to be brought into focus moving forward. Then on top, apply the eclipses, apply Mercury retrograde, apply the square that Jupiter is making to everything, which is just expanding things forcibly on some level. And yeah, so it's going to be exciting to say the least, right? So I think it's important to just highlight that Gemini season is going to be pretty exciting. And you may have already been feeling it. You may have already been feeling this buildup in the last weeks when Mercury and Venus moved into Gemini. All right, so that's kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about for Thursday. So let's just move into Friday. So first thing first on Friday is that the moon then moves into that square with Venus. It's kind of like the moon. I think the moon basically moves into a square, and then it moves into a sextile with Mars. And then I think also then it moves into the square with Mercury. So let's kind of break this down one at a time. So yeah, Moon square Venus in the early morning, middle of the night, basically like 1 in the morning. This is kind of just this will maybe happen for a lot of us while we're sleeping. So this may influence our dreams. This may carry us into the morning, but basically this is just putting another twist into what our Venus Saturn things we've committed to on some level. I think this is really just re-emphasizing that Venus Saturn collaboration. There may be some conflict that emerges, some hostility to that. Maybe we're second guessing some of our commitments on some level. But this is just going to like kind of turn the pages forward on that. So sure, we need to be prepared and discriminate for our fortunes. So fortune just being this kind of wheel of fortunes of things going up and down and whatever, things working out, things not. But we also need to accept that like life is just not perfect, right? So just because things are working out now doesn't mean they're always going to work out. Just because things are not working out now doesn't mean they're not going to work out at some point. There's just maybe some fractures in our connections and relationships. It doesn't mean that they're wrong or bad. We just have to let go of our expectations about what relationships are, what they're supposed to be doing for us, and what our role is in those relationships. Can we persevere through these bumps in the road? Moon is in a Venus sign. Moon is also in Venus's sign of depression, right? So it's in Venus, Virgo. So Venus is depressed in Virgo also because Venus is not sensual there. Venus doesn't want to be analyzed. Venus wants to just have a good time, wants to enjoy things. And Virgo is a sign of like, picking things apart, seeing the details and the flaws in the surface of things and the structure of things, and starting to try and like disseminate those things. And this can be a difficult transit maybe to have fun with. So perhaps if it's in the middle of the night and you're trying to enjoy yourself with somebody else, you're trying to enjoy yourself in whatever you're doing, this may be just a difficult time to have fun. So, I mean, if you're out that night or intimate this night, don't be surprised to lose some of the fun. It could be a bit of a wet blanket is what I mean. So yeah, and then let's just move forward to that next transit. So then the moon then moves into that sextile with Mars. Pretty much, again, it's like most people here in Germany are going to be sleeping, but if you're not, let's see how it goes for you. So the moon then sextiles Mars a few hours later. Again, like I said, middle of the night here in Central Europe, but this could just change that wet blanket maybe into more of a compassionate vibe. It could just make things a bit more sensitive. Mars is still in its fall. It's also in the moon's domicile. So there's this kind of relationship going on. So there is some sort of failing in the fight or the conflict, if there was a fight or conflict that went on with the moon squaring to Venus. There's just maybe a bit too much emotions involved right now. This could be about this is maybe just a chance to maybe take a break from the battle. And the moon is like sextiling with Mars. So maybe there's some common ground to find. If the relationships get a bit of a critical voice in it, this may show us what is and what is not serving us in that critical voice. Maybe what we're fighting about and how it does not really harmonize with our state of mind. Maybe with our suffering of the soul on some level, which is one of the significations of the moon. So, maybe one of the ways that we can find empathy towards one another is realizing that there is some suffering between us, and maybe we can connect and identify with that. So seeing that there just is maybe bigger, more pressing issues in the world, and that fighting over these little things is kind of petty, right? So that's just something I want to point out. All right. And then let's just move forward. So basically then the moon doesn't really do much until the afternoon when it moves into that square with Mercury. So yeah, moon moves into the square with Mercury, which, further emphasizes the sun's square with Jupiter that's going to happen also later on. So the sun's basically in a square with Jupiter right now too. This is not coming to common grounds with ideas, resources, understandings, maybe communications and circumstances. This is like having a conversation with the right intentions, but then the message kind of comes out really hard-edged and critical. This is maybe a misunderstanding combined with the necessity for a conversation. Often it's said, if you're going to send out some message, you're going to post something, you're going to post something, you're going to send out a newsletter, or you just send out your message to the world. Often best times not to do it is during Moon Mercury squares. So just putting that out there. But yeah, unfortunately, maybe we have to have a conversation right now, though. And regardless of if our message comes across the way we want it to or not, we're going to just have to do it. So it's not so much of a fun transit. It's very rational, like both the moon and Mercury, which are very mind-based planets, are in very rational and dry places right now, dry signs. So it's not going to be too much fun. But anyway, it may be that we're just maybe spending too much time trying to figure out the problems rather than maybe just come to conclusions on some level and just, do what's necessary to make things go forward. Maybe we just have to let go of some things, right? Maybe we have to persevere through the challenges of a difficult conversation. Anyway, so yeah, and then let's just move forward to that Sun Jupiter square. So the Sun squares the Jupiter. And this is kind of applying a bit more of a forcefulness to the propelling of the story forward in general. Something isn't quite right. This is where the vision of purpose comes into conflict with the green light of hopefulness. This is another situation where our faith is being put to the test. Have we stretched things too far? I think this is a kind of a theme going on. Have we stretched things too far? Have we made decisions we're not ready to make yet? Or have we made decisions that, we don't like anymore, something like that. Maybe we broke things off and we didn't really want to, or have we just gone back on what was actually good for us on some level? Don't be surprised if we start to see that Jupiter in Pisces now is only a taste of 2022, right? So if we're expecting big things to happen and they're not happening yet, that's because we're not being realistic about things. This is actually 2021. The main story is a Saturnian one. Yeah, there's just another with the sun moving into Gemini too. Well, I'm going to erase some of these circles because it seems a bit confusing. Okay, with the sun moving into Gemini as well, it's just adding another critical force voice to the failings of law, order, unity, hopefulness of the constitutional powers that be, which is what Jupiter represents. This is like questioning the teacher all the time, no matter what, without waiting to see if the lesson you're in is actually going to answer any of that questions for you. This is about learning to trust the process, right? The answers come in time, not in one swoop of the brush. It's like painting. You get to this stage where you kind of hate everything about the painting. This is a time to apply maybe a more critical eye, see what's not working, make adjustments, applying those changes and working it. We need to do the work in order to see the results. Often results will be not really what we expect them to be, but maybe those results will be something that we love because they're not what we expected. But it doesn't mean that we don't have to put in the work first, right? So the story is going into a bit more wild waters. Now that the eclipse season is literally starts next week, Mercury goes retrograde next week, we're entering into rapid wild waters. Don't be surprised from this point forward that we're going to have to navigate those waters. We're going to have to pay more attention, and it really is time to pay more attention and to put in our end of the work in order to thrive, if that's what we want, right? If we want these Jupiterian things that we got exposed to since the last days, we're gonna have to put in some work for those things to actually manifest this year, maybe, but definitely next year. Now is the time to put in that footwork. Okay, so that's kind of the last thing I wanted to talk about for Friday. So let's just move into Saturday. All right, so let's just move right to the trend. So Moon then moves into Libra, and yeah, so Moon moves into Libra, new energy shifting towards more Venusian things. So compromising, balancing, fairness, social nuances, maybe just being more objective as well in general, just seeing two sides to every coin. It's going to happen pretty early in the morning, right? So it's going to carry over to the day. And actually, I think Saturday is going to be the most relaxed of the days of this week. So at least let's see how it goes. The moon also then basically will also trine with Saturn later tomorrow as well, but it's going to trine first with the sun. So this is going to be more supportive voice as well in what's working, what's not from this whole lunation cycle, preparing to let go, preparing to put down the swords, so to speak, like the rhetorical swords in our fencing match. To turn down the power of our perseverance a little, to ease our focus into what matters rather than just trying to do everything, right? Just trying to figure it all out right now, because we're just not going to do that. We have to be realistic about these things. So maybe we need to find some peace between ourselves and others, getting closer with the relationships that matter and who cares about us the most. I think this is bringing up again this Venus Saturn trine that went on earlier in the week. So yeah, it's a time to see both sides of the coin. And this is just where compassion is really going to emerge when we start to have more empathy for the situation. But yeah, there's not really much else to say about today other than like that trine to the sun, and also then moon just moves through Libra for the rest of the day. So let's just get to the last day of the week. So let's just move on to Sunday. So first things first, there's a lot going on today to close off the week. So I'm going to just break it down one by one. But basically, moon trines with Saturn in the middle of the night before Mercury then squares with Neptune, and then the moon is going to trine with Mars. The moon's going to trine with Venus and then square with Mars. So this is a lot to wake up to. Moon is carrying over a lot as we start this day. This is a bit of a win-lose situation where it's like maybe we get some good stuff, maybe then we lose some stuff, and then we also win some stuff. So this is just another kind of reality check. It's like life on life's terms, seeing that there's more to the story than meets the eye, I think. But yeah, so let's just talk first about that trine to Saturn. So moon's trining with Saturn is reminding us of some of the commitments we made early in the week with the Venus trine Saturn. Moon is in exaltation. Moon is also in the exaltation of Saturn now. So the circumstances of relationships may be more solid. There's just more of an understanding of the impermanence of things, that we can't bake our own cake, or we can't make our own cake and eat it too, so to speak. And, Saturn's also in its domicile, so there is strength to our commitments, and this helps us to rest easy on some level. Like, this is the middle of the night, so we may just rest more easily. This leaves us also with this strong sense of understanding as well, and our purpose in the world, and this sense of direction that's very future oriented, that the things we're doing now are going to matter in the future. And this is using this like kind of the right resources to make long-lasting, solid circumstances for our future. That also comes from our relationships too, right? So the right ingredients for the longest circumstances, again, making commitments that last the winter, so to speak. Okay, so then let's just move forward to that Mercury, Neptune square. Okay, would have happened. Yeah, basically, literally, like it happens right after that trine, the moon's trine to Saturn. So Mercury's gonna make that square to Neptune. This is just super confusing. It's in the middle of the night, so it just may be like super confusing thinking going on, maybe confusing conversations. If you're out on Saturday night and you get into one of those like drug-induced conversations, it's just gonna be total gobbledygook on some level. So really not really sure what is even said and if it even makes sense. Maybe even like, get into a conflict and you don't even know why. So not really making any sense at all. Not a good time to communicate message. High chance of misunderstanding. Mercury is also well into shadow now. So just be aware that whatever's said, whatever is exchanged, you're going to have to go back over it. It may haunt you, right? So watch your words. Once they come out, I've said this before, once your words come out, there's no taking them back. And you may be just questioning what you said because it's definitely going to be misunderstood. All right, there's a lot more going on today, so let's just move on into the Saturn then going retrograde. So Saturn will go retrograde pretty much midway through the day. This can just mean going back maybe on some of those commitments we've made, second guessing them at least, or easing up on our restrictions and limitations as well. If Saturn moving forward means very solid discipline, very solid limitations on what we're doing, what the bigger story, the bigger picture is right now, this may be going back on some of those things. Maybe some boundaries of ours are loosening up. It may be that, you know, some of those big investments we made, some of those long-term goals we made, those results born through long hardships may start to take a turn now, either for good or for ill. Saturn significations may also just be flipped. You may find that harder edges get soft or softer edges get hard. Depends on how Saturn's condition is in your chart. This is one of those things where it's like, really depends on how your relationship to Saturn is, and some of the different Saturnian significations in your life, and how when it goes retrograde, those are going to change. And this happens once a year, so you probably know what I'm talking about. But basically, it's just like a loosening of these Saturnian boundaries and borders, maybe even failing to maintain our boundaries, like I said. Going back on those secure things in our lives, those resources we think are solid, those heavy things that are not solid. This is like kind of like seeing, you know, in architecture, how, especially a lot of modern architecture, from the facade, it looks like something very solid and has a lot of basis. But then you remove that facade and you realize it's just foam, it's just concrete, it's just steel, it's not stone, it's not anything of value. It's just the most accessible resources we have in order to make these buildings, which are very well engineered. They're very ingenious, but they don't have the same kinds of material value that maybe they're trying to come across as, right? So it's kind of like seeing how our personal footprint in such smaller story is also in this bigger paradigm as well. And what does that mean to us personally? What does it mean to have these responsibilities in the world? What does it mean to see that our facade is not as solid as we want others to see it, or others, the ones that we're perceiving? What if what if the things that we're putting a lot of faith into are just showing all these cracks? You know, we're starting to see all the cracks in the system now. And, you know, now we're starting to see that beneath it all, it's not as solid as we thought it was. And I think that with Saturn going retrograde, it's kind of emphasizing that. And we're starting to kind of maybe come more to terms with, like, what is our problems in this? What is not our problems in this? What is gained through the hardships we've had so far? And then what responsibilities come with those hardships? Just because we've gained something, usually it means that it comes with a lot more responsibility. If there's something that we want and it means a lot to us, it means that we have to also work to keep it, right? So this is kind of going back over all that's been kind of gained from all the hard work and coming to terms with the more hard work to come. Shit just doesn't pop out of thin air. And I think the more we can kind of come to terms with that life just doesn't like hand us all the results that we want into our lap. We actually have to do work to get results. And also, like, just because we do the work doesn't mean the results are going to come as well. On some level, we have to accept that. But so often results that do come doesn't mean that we're even going to understand them, or maybe we don't even like them. But at least we can sit well with that self-acceptance that we did the work necessary to do it. Okay, so let's just move forward the next transit of the day. And then the moon is going to trine with Gemini. I'm sorry, with Mercury in Gemini. So yeah, right there. All right, so moon's going to move trine with Mercury. This is a much better time to communicate. So if you're wanting to communicate something, now's maybe a better time to do it. Sure, Mercury is about to station retrograde, but this is just a much better, more sympathetic, supportive scenario between Mercury and the moon. Sure, there's still this kind of wishy-washy Neptune vibe, because technically Mercury is still in a square. It's a separating square, so it's separating from it, which is a good thing. That means that whatever kind of lost in the sauce communications went on, they're starting to kind of, they were in the past, or at least like maybe we'll have the results from those, but now is basically just now is a much better time to communicate what you're ever going to do. There's more sympathy to get across what you're feeling as well. Connecting through communications that reflect our feelings and our desires for peace and flexibility. Being on the same page with friends and loved ones, balancing things out that needed a bit more smoothing out, right? So again, this may need to be gone over again with the Mercury retrograde, but at least things are in a more peaceable and supportive situation. Moon in Libra may be frustrated with the last transits that went on, especially all this, maybe some of the, like I said, there was a square to Mars as well, but at least now the thinking and the exchanges suit the environment, right? It's our decision and agency that will make this into a more peaceable and supportive scenario. It's all about coming to terms with our side and things, keeping our side of the street clean, you know, and responsibility in relationships also means doing the work necessary to keep our actions in line with our principles, leading and behaving with integrity, or at least as much integrity as we can. You know, nobody's perfect. All right, so that's almost it. And then I just want to briefly talk about the last transit of the week before moving on and closing this transit video. But yeah, so the moon, before it leaves Libra, it's going to make that square to Pluto, right? And normally I would kind of overlook this, but because it's the last transit of the week, I think it's just like, it's relating a lot to some of the earlier things in the week, especially with that opposition that Moon made to Pluto right at the beginning of the week. And so we're getting kind of another dose of fear, maybe darkness, coming to terms with the reality of the world that we live in, that it's not just, you know, we can't just manifest our wills into the world and expect everything to work out. It's not a time to wallow in self-pity, though. Nothing is going to change unless we take responsibility for our place in the world, in our world and in the world around us. It's a bit of a difficult end to the week, but we're also paying attention now. This is also preparing us on what to move forward with. So we're about to come into the full moon. We're about to come into eclipse season next week, or sorry, the first eclipse of the year next week. And so this may be like a bit of a necessary fear. Sometimes fear can be this great motivator to take responsibility for the things that we need to take responsibility for in order to get through some of the challenging and more uncertain times that we're in. This is like learning that life is actually a very difficult thing. Life is not easy. Everybody's in this together. It's not a walk in the park. And you know, we're gonna make attachments in this life. And if we form attachments, they're gonna come with suffering, because we can't just will everything to work all the time. Things are not always gonna go according to plan. So I think really what I wanna emphasize with this kind of last transit of the week, and it happens in the middle of the night, this may be like a very cathartic dreaming experience, that we come maybe a bit closer to some level of knowing that like self-acceptance really is the key to coming to terms with our attachments. If we want them to manifest, if we want them to be something in our lives, you know, if this is something we're wishing for, something we're attaching ourselves to, some belief we have about ourselves and the world, it's only through self-acceptance that we're going to be able to live with some of the suffering that comes along with those attachments. Anyway, so there is my big long spiel of the week. And so let's just bring this back to the face-to-face here. Yeah, was kind of exciting week to go through. I hope that everybody got something out of that. I hope everyone's been doing well this year, and that there is some good things coming out of this Jupiter and Pisces season. That, you know, we can have some faith that some of the things maybe are not working out exactly according to plan, but that things are going forward regardless of our criticisms on them or not. But yeah, this is a week to kind of see where there is a bit more delusion in some of our expectations about things, and how to let go of those, how to work with them in a more healthy and realistic manner. Anyway, so that's it for this week. Next week, I just want to briefly touch on moon moves into Scorpio basically on Monday, and it's coming back to that place. The reason I point this out is because then the moon's coming back to that place of the Scorpio full moon of the last lunation, and maybe we can think about how things have changed since then. The moon, then we get that full moon in Sagittarius, first eclipse of the year. This is where the chaos really begins in earnest. Venus is then going to square with Neptune. Overstimulation basically steps up a notch. Mercury, then Venus conjunction, which is really interesting because basically Mercury is like getting ready to station retrograde and it's going so slow. Then Venus actually is the one that's conjoining Mercury. It's not the other way around. So that's pretty interesting because the role playing is exchanged, at least in terms of speed, in terms of manner on some level. So I thought that was interesting to point out. We'll talk about it more next week. And then last things last, Mercury stations retrograde next week. So it's going to be a time to go over some of the exchanges of the last 2 weeks, as I've been saying all today. So that's it. Thank you, everyone, for always tuning in. Like I said, if you want to support this channel, likes, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. I really appreciate everyone's support. If you want to book a consultation with me, all the contact information is down below. So I wish you guys a fun week. Make the most out of it. Easy does it. And keep coming back. I'll see you next week. Bye.